Good morning, everyone. Here we are at week number 7 in Bio 120 Lab. You've just got this week and next week to go, and you'll be finished with the term. So let's see what we've got going on. Oh, say hello to our little alligator baby there. And it's so cute. All right, so last week you learned about Mendelian genetics, dominant recessive traits, how they're passed along. You worked on some Punnett squares. You looked at some patterns of inheritance, especially through our fast plant lab that you did, and hopefully you got finished with that because it took so long to grow all of those seeds. But hopefully you did, and you learned some more about dihybrid crosses where you're looking at two separate traits and how they can be heterozygous for each trait and how those traits are passed along into offspring, and then what possible offspring you get from those crosses. This week we're going to learn about relationships in biology, so food webs. We used to call these food chains, but one predator doesn't eat one type of prey, which eats one type of grass seed, etc. It just doesn't work like that in nature. So a better description of who eats whom out there in the world is a food web. And so we're going to take a look at that using examples from the Everglades. You're going to look at population dynamics. And so this is a population as members of the same species that live together in a place and time. Okay, so if you're talking about the population of the United States, it's all the people who live here in these borders, in this country, now or over a period of time. It depends on what your definition is of the population. So how do population dynamics change over time when there are stressors? This is a whole wing of biology to study populations. And demographics, how are individuals broken out into age groups? This is especially important if you go into insurance of any type. It's terribly important. How are the different age groups broken out in a particular population of any type, not just human beings, of any type? How many young do you have? How many breeding individuals do you have? How many older individuals do you have? So this is really important in lots of different populations, whether you're talking about plants or you're talking about human beings. So this week, what do you have due? The 7-1 lab is all about food webs, and you're going to draw a food web and answer the questions, and I'm going to show you an example of that in just a minute so that you do it correctly. Lab 7-2 is about carrying capacity, so how many individuals of a population can an ecosystem provide enough sustenance for in order for those individuals to survive? You realize that you can have too many individuals. That is certainly true for all types of animals that we have. So, for example, deer. How many deer can a particular ecosystem handle? This is one of the jobs of the Department of Natural Resources anywhere that you live. They do population studies of animals like deer, because there are only so many deer that a particular ecosystem can support. And after that, when the population gets too big, they start dying from diseases and all that sort of thing. So carrying capacity, and I've just explained what demographics is, how you break down individuals in different age groups, etc. Do not complete activity number 4. You're just going to do 1, 2, and 3, and believe me, it is going to take you plenty of time to do those 3. Now, here's the thing. In this lab, you're going to be making graphs. Remember how you did that at the very beginning of the term? Yeah. But the question for students always is, what do I graph in this lab? So for activity 1, you're graphing all 4 of the lines. So you should have a graph with 4 lines. Activity 2, you are only graphing population growth rate, that last column in your data table, on the y-axis, so that goes on the y-axis, versus time interval on the x-axis. Do this for both the data tables, 2A and 2B. Activity 3, only survivorship. Don't graph everything in that table because that doesn't make sense. Don't do that. Remember, I told you way back in the beginning that when you make a data table like that, it's always that last column that's the important one. That's what you're trying to get at. So in activity 3, survivorship per 1,000 individuals on the y-axis and years and decades on the x-axis. You're going to have 2 lines because you chose 2 cohorts, and most students are using their gravestone cards for this. You can go out and look at a cemetery if you want to, but it's going to take you a while to collect all that information, so you just use the gravestone cards. It's fine. So you're going to compare 2 groups of individuals. So for example, in one time period, how many males survived compared to how many females survived. Or you're going to choose 2 different time periods. How many people survived from 1810 to 1850 and how many survived from 1850 to 1890. You know, something like that. So you're going to choose 2 cohorts. So you're going to have 2 lines on that graph because you have 2 different groups that you took a look at. All right. And I want to give you an example of how populations can change and what effect a population can have, even on human beings, when the population gets out of control. So back in the 1990s, in 1993, there was an outbreak of a pneumonia type of infection. So a pneumonia means that your lungs fill up with water. So there was a respiratory tract infection that caused pneumonia that was happening in young people in the 4 corners of the United States: Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, and Arizona. There was an outbreak of this respiratory infection that we couldn't identify for a while, and it was occurring in young people, and they were dying. So the CDC started investigating this. Well, when they started asking questions about it, where these people had been, what had they done, where did they live, what were their activities, what foods did they eat, you know, they have to ask all kinds of questions in order to figure out what was happening. Somebody mentioned that the Native Americans had a saying in this region, and they said, "If spring rain comes, then young men die." And the CDC individuals were thinking about that, and they said, okay, what's the thing here? So people have been noticing this for decades, centuries. What the heck is going on here? So there had been spring rains. What was the connection? Well, as they continued to investigate this, they figured out that this disease was caused by a hantavirus. And that's what these young people were being infected with. And they also narrowed it down to these individuals had been cleaning out houses, sweeping up, cleaning out, things like that. And what they figured out was that mice that had been in these locations, these houses, these barns, etc., had left behind urine and feces. And as these young people were sweeping, that dust was getting into the air. They were breathing in hantavirus, and they were getting this pneumonia-like infection that was killing them. So what the heck was the connection with the story that the Native Americans had? The connection is that when spring rains came in this very arid area of the United States, then there was just a huge bloom out of grasses and all kinds of plants that produce seeds, because all these plants were waiting, all their seeds were waiting for years in order to germinate. And so when there was rain, they would. So there was a huge amount of seeds and nuts and all that sort of thing out there. And then what happened to the mouse population? That exploded because there was such a huge food source. So without all this food, the mouse population would not explode like this. So the mouse population exploded, and then the mice started moving into areas that they hadn't been in before, houses, barns, etc. And that's why the people were coming in contact with so much mouse fecal material and dried urine. Don't know why that just did that, but it did. Anyway, so this shows you why you need to understand populations, because the spring rains that came in this area caused a problem that caused human beings to die, and that's because of the mouse population. This is just one reason to study populations. It's very important for lots of segments of biology, and just like I mentioned before, if you're in insurance, this is terribly important. Note about the gravestone cards, please take a look at those, because they're organized, I think, by ages. So take a look at them before you start doing your counting, so that you get the population that you want when you're doing that activity number 3. Just wanted you to make sure of that. Okay, how do you make a food web? So you're going to draw some animals and plants and algae and their relationship to each other. So I'm giving you a really simple example here. So we've got turtles, bass, that's a kind of fish, egret, which are some water birds, and alligators. Okay, now what I want you to notice is the direction of the arrows. So when you draw the arrows in a food web to show the relationship between the organisms in the food web, you draw the arrow in the direction of the energy flow. So the alligator eats the turtle, and you'd think you draw the arrow in the other direction. No, the alligator consumes the turtle, and the energy from the turtle moves out into the alligator. So draw the arrows in the direction of the energy flow until you get to usually these apex predators. But then, of course, when they die off, then fungi and bacteria and things like that decompose those apex predators. So you can draw an arrow from an alligator to a fungus if you want to. So anyway, just wanted to show you an example of how that works. Also this week, this is a busy week, you've got your final project submission. So you have to have done your experiment, you have to collect your data, you have to analyze it, you have to come to a conclusion, you have to put this all together as a presentation. Be sure to follow the guidelines in the rubric. You're using milestones 1 and 2 to complete your presentation along with that data that you've collected. And be sure and represent the data, not in words. Represent these in a graph, a table, however, and come to a conclusion. Write out in sentence form the outlines that you've already made, because you need to be able to explain your topic in your presentation. Use PowerPoint, Google Slides, something like this. It doesn't have to be PowerPoint, but a lot of people use that to create your 7 to 10 slides. Make sure you use images. Don't just have words written on a slide. That is so boring. As I say that, as I have a slide full of words here in front of you. But anyway, that's because I'm explaining things to you. 7 to 10 slides. Use images to make your presentation look interesting, and don't forget to include your information from your references to back up your work, and include a reference section. All the information is there in the guidelines and rubric. And just as a reminder, the end of the semester, the end of this term, is Sunday, October 23rd. Everything for this course has to be turned in by midnight that night. You cannot submit work after that. You cannot send it to me to submit, because I cannot do that. All I can do is grade, and then get your grade turned in by Tuesday that next week. So let me know if you've got any issues going on, if we need to ask for an incomplete. If we do that, you have to have completed 70% of the assignments up until the point that we ask for the incomplete. So be aware of that. But if you're having issues, you need to let me know ahead of time. I cannot do this after the end of the term, which is Sunday, October the 23rd. If you need anything, you have any questions, please email me, m.sigmon@snhu.edu. I will be glad to answer you. And with that being said, I hope that you have a wonderful week.